First of all, Mr. Chairman, what Patriots Super Bowl shirt? You are going to be wearing green and gold that day. Now I'll talk about the polar bear. The polar bear is a majestic and fascinating creature that should be observed, admired, and protected, and its habitat is declining. The price of crude oil is reaching $100 a barrel, and the United States needs more and not less access to domestic oil and gas reserves. But I'm afraid that this hearing of a select committee charged with examining the nexus of energy independence and global warming, the polar bear is simply becoming a political tool, and that's a shame. There have been some cynical speculation in the media, and among some others, that the polar bear is just a few decades from extinction, and the current administration is ready and willing to diminish the polar bear's flight in order to help the oil and gas industry. I believe nothing could be further from the truth, and it's my hope that this hearing can help address some of these misconceptions. Currently, the administration is looking at two decisions that, while interrelated, are decided under two separate, distinct, and different laws that support two different policy goals: protection of the polar bear and progress on energy and security through the development of domestic oil and gas reserves. For more than a year, the Department of the Interior has been studying whether to list the polar bear as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. This is a complicated and nuanced question, but one whose answer must be based solely, and I emphasize solely, on the best scientific and commercial information about the polar bear. If the scientists and wildlife managers at the Interior Department determine that the polar bear should be listed as a threatened species, then the United States should take all required steps under the Endangered Species Act to protect the polar bear. I note that regardless of whether the polar bear is listed under the Endangered Species Act, it is already protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. The Interior Department's Minerals Management Service has also decided to move forward with an oil and gas lease sale in Alaska's Chukchi Sea, which is a part of the polar bear's habitat. Should the polar bear be listed, then oil and gas companies will have to take all appropriate efforts to ensure that their exploration and production are done in a manner required by the Endangered Species Act. The timing of these separate decisions is incidental to protecting the polar bear. The hallmark of the Endangered Species Act is that listing decisions need to be based solely on sound scientific and commercial information and not politics. I worry that today's hearing will focus too much on the politics and not enough on the science. And that certainly isn't good news for either the polar bears or for America's energy security. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a technical question for Dr. Amstrup. What has been the trend in the polar bear population since 1972? Do we have more of them, less of them, same number?
Thank you, Congressman. That's a good question because it's one that has come up repeatedly in the press and in the public. Historically, our knowledge about polar bears goes back to about the mid-1960s, and it was at that time that people who were interested in Arctic wildlife realized that polar bears pretty much worldwide were being harvested extensively. We had aerial trophy hunting that was occurring in Alaska. There was shipborne trophy hunting that was occurring in north of Norway. They were using set guns on the Svalbard archipelago to kill polar bears, basically a trap kind of a situation to get the furs. And populations were recognized as being very low at that time frame. Just how low they were wasn't clear because nobody had been doing detailed studies.
My time is limited. So when did the hunting protections of polar bears kick in? What year was that?
1972 is when the Marine Mammal Protection Act kicked in.
Okay, so the Marine Mammal Protection Act, at least within the United States, stopped the type of hunting that you were describing that occurred in the 60s. Now, what has happened to the polar bear population since the Marine Mammal Protection Act became effective? Has it gone up?
Our research has shown that the populations have increased substantially, not only in Alaska, but in many other parts of their range, up into the mid-90s or so.
That's the answer that I was looking for. Now, Mr. Luthi, did I hear you correctly when you testified that the proposed lease in the Chukchi Sea, there had been an examination of the impact on the polar bear habitat, and the result was that if the exploration and the drilling occurred, that there would be a negligible impact on the polar bear attitude? Did I hear you correctly when you said that?
That is correct, and that was also, I believe, a statement by Director Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, we're also required to confer with the wildlife agencies, and that's actually one of the stricter acts that's available, and we must comply with that as well.
Well, after hearing you, Dr. Amstrup, and having heard the result of your study, Mr. Luthi, let me say that the fears that I expressed in my opening statement, I guess, are coming to fruition. It seems that the scientific evidence that Dr. Amstrup has referred to and the study that Mr. Luthi has done in the course of the discharge of his duties indicate that while there is perhaps a problem with polar bear population, going ahead with the lease will not have a major impact on the habitat of the polar bears in this part of the sea across Alaska. You know, if that's the case, then I don't think Mr. Markey's bill has the scientific background that is necessary to affect what he wants to do, and that this process is going along fairly well, even though it is a two-track process under the existing law that has been passed by this Congress. So what's the beat?